Thanks, future Mr. Powers. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. Um, Today, we're going to look at embedding our quotes into our own sentences, how to make it flow as a paragraph so we're not just copying and pasting, we're not just throwing something in that doesn't quite make sense. We are actually incorporating the writer's words from the original text into our own words to make our point more clear. Okay, so the concrete detail only works if it has a good claim and has good commentary to follow it up. But today we're going to focus mostly on how to make those quotes fit and how to make it flow well and how to make your writing clear and concise. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we are going to look at an example where I have some quotes selected. So I've pre-selected some quotes and a claim and some commentary. We're going to talk mostly about how would we take this and put it into a paragraph if this was like a pre-write. So the claim in his essay Crabs Dig Holes, James Allen McPherson shows that true isolation is not always possible because we belong to a shared environment. That's a pretty good claim, but we're not talking about claims. We're focusing on CDs. Okay. So concrete detail number one. Here's a quote. I'm your neighbor across the street. My wife and I have been watching your house. We see you come and go once in a while. Now we're worried about you. Your Christmas tree lights have been on all night. We thought that something had happened to cause you not to turn them off. Now, okay, does that support the claim that isolation is not always possible? Yeah, it's an example of how he wanted to be isolated, but couldn't because his neighbor called anyway, right? And so my commentary says McPherson wanted to be left alone, but his neighbors noticed something was out of the ordinary and called him. Again, that's not great. That's just kind of holding the place. We're going to look at what to do here, how to take this quote and fit it in. Because first of all, look, that's too long. Your concrete details, the quotes that you use should be less than a full sentence. If you're using a full sentence or more, multiple sentences, it's probably too much of the original author's words. So, why is that a problem? First of all, your paragraph or essay is your writing. You're writing, you're responding to a text, you're writing about a text, you're analyzing the text, but you're doing it, so you should have more of your words there than the author's words. But second of all, it can make it unclear if we have several sentences. It can make it unclear what exactly the point is. So we want to narrow it down to what seems to matter most as it applies to our claim. So this is all good. It's when the neighbor called and it's the phone call. But if we just pop this into a paragraph, let me just delete these so it starts to look like a paragraph. This isn't how you make turn a pre-write into a rough draft, but right, if I just read it now, in his essay Crabs Dig Holes, James Allen McPherson shows that true isolation is not always possible because we belong to a shared environment. I'm your neighbor across the street. My wife and I have been watching your house. We see you come and go once in a while, etc. This just shows up out of nowhere, right? I don't know who said it or why. Is this James Allen McPherson, the writer, saying I'm your neighbor across the street? That's weird. Is it the neighbor talking to? We don't know anything. So we need to support it before we even worry about cutting down the length. We need to realize that it needs to be set up properly. It needs some kind of context and lead and a lead in. So I'll say something real briefly about the context of this quote and make sure I mention who says it. So I might say something like McPherson wanted to sleep through Christmas Day, through Christmas. McPherson wanted to sleep through Christmas and stay or sorry, and be alone, but his neighbor called calls him. Period. I'm ending that sentence. Um, we'll do past tense. Fine. I'm ending the sentence. Your concrete detail can be more than one sentence. So I give a little context here. Now I'm gonna do a lead in. During the call, the neighbor says, and then that big old quote. So if this is now all my concrete detail. If this is color coded, right, this would be the red. That's a lot. That's a whole lot because we still have this quote that takes up 4 lines. Now it can be more than one sentence. That's fine. Because I'm trying to give context. Now I know the context. I know who said it. Makes a little more sense. It's still too long. So I'll leave it red for now. McPherson wanted to sleep through Christmas. That's good. And here's the quote. I'm your neighbor across the street, my wife. Do we need the whole conversation? Do we need the whole quote? No, we don't. What's the point we're trying to make? That McPherson's trying to say you can't always stay isolated if you want to. That there's a, when you're part of nature, you're part of an environment. It's hard to be left alone. Okay, so what in this 4 lines supports that? I'm your neighbor across the street? No, don't need that. Because I can put that in the context. That doesn't need to be quoted. There's nothing significant or unique about the word choice there. I don't need that in my quote. My wife and I have been watching your house. We see you come and go once in a while. Now we're worried about you. Your Christmas tree lights have been on all night. We thought something had happened to cause you to not turn them off. Okay. I think what really matters here is they noticed something, right? And that's what messed up his isolation, because they noticed something was different. So I'm going to take off my wife and I've been watching your house. We see you come and go. Now we're worried about you. Saying now we're worried about you, that seems pretty important, but I'm still deleting it. It is important. But what's the point I'm trying to make? That McPherson is talking about how you can't always stay isolated. So now I have your Christmas tree lights have been turned off, have been on all night, and we thought that something had happened to cause you not to turn them off. That is still too long. That's still a full sentence. It's not a short sentence. You can use a full sentence if it's like 6 or 7 words. It's really short, that's fine. But do we need all of this? What is the most important thing here? And I think it's that they noticed something. We thought that something had happened, because that shows us that they're worried. It shows us that they're keeping an eye out. It shows us a lot. And we don't really need the rest. So I'm going to even take off the Christmas lights part. If I really want that detail in there, maybe I can add it to the commentary. Maybe I can slip it into the context up here, where I'm setting up the quote. But now let's look at the second sentence of the concrete detail. During the call, the neighbor says, we thought that something had happened to cause you not to turn them off. Ah, that's confusing, right? Because turn what off? I've deleted all of that. So I have some options. I can adjust this in some way. What I'm going to do is add a mention of the Christmas lights in my lead-in. So during the call, the neighbor says he noticed Christmas lights on all night, and says, okay, now this doesn't make sense, right? During the call, the neighbor says, then he says, I'm gonna adjust it. This is how we work it as we go. We keep checking to see, does this still make sense? Is this still a sentence? Or as we kind of chop it up and add and subtract, does it lose its sense-ness, right? Does it stop making sense? That's what we're gonna try to do. So I think it stops making sense. During the call, the neighbor says he noticed Christmas light on all night and says, we thought, I mean, okay, that's too much. It's confusing. So what I'm going to say is the neighbor says, I'll say the neighbor tells him. No, I will say the neighbor had noticed. Okay, so the neighbor had noticed Christmas lights on all night and says, I'll say, and he says, we thought that something had happened to cause you not to turn them off. Let's look at the concrete detail as a whole, this whole red part. McPherson wanted to sleep through Christmas and be alone, but his neighbor called him. The neighbor had noticed Christmas lights on all night, and he says, quote, we thought that something had happened to cause you not to turn them off. Great. Huge improvement. It has gone from 4 lines and multiple sentences to less than 1 sentence of actual quoted material, right? And the things that needed to be mentioned got mentioned, but didn't need to be quoted, right? So saying that he noticed the Christmas lights, I can put that in the context or the setup for it. Okay. And then before we do our next example, looking at the commentary, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Like I said, we're working on how to embed the quotes better. This is too simple of a commentary. McPherson wanted to be left alone, but his neighbors noticed something was out of the ordinary and called him. It's not wrong. And here, I'm going to sneak it up here to try to make it look like a paragraph like we did before. And it's not wrong, but it's also not enough. This just sort of explains on the surface what the quote says. Your commentary does not summarize or repeat or restate or explain the quote on the surface. Your commentary talks about what the author is trying to do with that quote, what the author is accomplishing, how it affects the audience, what it makes us think or feel. You often will have something kind of on the surface like this to explain it so that you can get to the bigger point you're making. So if I say McPherson wanted to be left alone, but his neighbors noticed something was out of the ordinary and called him, I'm going to continue by saying this shows how he couldn't isolate himself even though he wanted to, because neighbors are part of his. Nope, that doesn't make sense. Because yeah, I'm trying to model, like, you change it as you go, you keep working on it till it makes sense. Because he was a part of their environment and something was something seemed wrong. Okay, I could go on and I'm not gonna for too long, but what I want to point out here is what I'm trying to do is bring it back to our claim up here where it says you can't isolate yourself because we share an environment. So I wanted to include that in my commentary, something about being a part of a bigger environment. I needed to make sure that my commentary is saying how this quote supports this. So I can't just say my quote supports my claim. I can't just say the quote supports the claim. That's not good writing and it doesn't make sense and doesn't prove or explain or do anything. All right. So I need to explain it. I need to like draw it out a little bit and show how it does. Okay, next concrete detail. Let's sneak it back up there so it starts looking like a paragraph. I'll make it red so we can tell the difference. And let's see what we got here. First of all, we know we're going to have to set that up. We can't just leave it in there on its own. But it says, a spring bumblebee wormed its way into the very center of the sanctuary I had so carefully constructed around the very outsides of myself and against the magnetic field of outside life. That sounds like a good sentence. There's some good stuff in there. And it's not even a full sentence, really. Like, maybe I could just leave it. No, it's still pretty long, right? It takes up 3 lines. There's a lot going on. First of all, I need some sort of transition and lead in. And so I'll say another way McPherson shows his failed isolation, right? He tries and fails, is when he describes being stung by a bee. So there's a little context transition. Now I need to actually set up the quote, but let's look at what we need here. A spring bumblebee had wormed its way into the very center of the sanctuary I had so carefully constructed around the very outsides of myself. I'm telling you right now, what stands out to me, the sanctuary I had so carefully constructed. That phrase to me is really important because a sanctuary implies there's something important and holy and almost like religious, like it's something very special. A sanctuary, it's sacred and carefully constructed shows that he was trying really hard to have it a certain way. He carefully constructed it. He made it himself. He did everything he could to try to shut himself off. So I'm going to delete all that other stuff and leave the phrase that I think really cuts to the point that I'm trying to make about being part of an environment and how that can prevent you from trying to be alone. So let's set it up. And I'll say, I can make it very simple. He says that a bee, did it say invaded? I hope it did. I'll go back and check it. If I'm wrong, future Mr. Powers, please pause it and apologize. Okay, thank you, future Mr. Powers. Okay, he says that a bee invaded his sanctuary. I put brackets around it because I can't say my. If I say he says that a bee invaded my sanctuary, who, mine? No, his. But I can't say his in quotes because that's not, I can't quote that because that's not what it says. So the brackets here show that I've changed something. I changed my to his so that it works as a sentence because I'm writing in third person and he's writing in first person. Okay. And so I'm going to do the he here. Change I to he. Same rules apply with the brackets. And I'm not going to check right now if this is exactly what he said. But if invaded is in the quote, that we would need to find a way to include that because it's a very specific good word, invaded, right? A bee didn't invade his house. It just showed up. But him saying it is like it's an enemy coming in. Okay. So sanctuary he is so carefully constructed. Now, that can be your concrete detail. It is now, I'm not using a full sentence in my quote. That's the point I'm trying to make. I set it up clearly and I know whose words these are. These are the writer's words, the narrator's words. And then I'll do a very quick commentary here. Let's make it green. And what it says so far, he wanted to keep the world out, but it found a way to get in. Very simple explanation. That's true, but it's not enough. And so I can say, by using the word sanctuary, so I'm quoting the quote. That's how we analyze. By using the word sanctuary, McPherson shows how important it was to him to be alone. And nature still found a way to get to him, even though his isolation was, and I'm going to use the quote again, carefully constructed. So what I'm doing there is really emphasizing how this quote specifically does what the claim says, right? And I might even add a third sentence. Your commentary should be more than one sentence. It should be two or three. So I should say maybe one more sentence here would be fine to really drive the point home that it wasn't possible, right? No matter how hard he tried, he could not separate himself from his own environment, right? And you could go on about how we're all connected or whatever. So here we go. This is fine. It's better than it was. This is what I want you to see. I'm going to pause it. We're going to practice it. Thank you guys. Now, cool. Thank you, future Mr. Powers.